Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Aquarium of the Pacific. We're going to get our program started. Thank you for being here, braving the rain, or if you're watching online, not braving the rain, but hanging out on your couch with us. My name is Jennie Dean. I'm the Vice President of Education and Conservation here at the Aquarium of the Pacific, and I'm also one of your presenters tonight. We are here in part because of the generosity of Steve and Brenda Olson, the Osborn and Roork Charitable Trust, and the Courtyard by Marriott Hotel here in downtown Long Beach. We really appreciate all of their support and your support too for being here tonight. Tonight you're here to hear about California wildlife from gray whales to Garibaldi, and the vehicle that we're using to share those stories is the California Marine Species Report Card. This is a product that the aquarium put out about a month ago. It's got a lot of coverage since then, so hopefully some of you have already heard about it, maybe through the LA Times or KCRW. But if not, you're here to learn about it while learning about the stories of the animals, plants, and other critters that are inside that Marine Species Report Card. This is my first time not only being your host, but your presenter, and I'm pretty excited because my co-presenter is the CEO and president of the Aquarium of the Pacific, Dr. Peter Kareiva. Now, Peter doesn't like things to be dull, so he challenged us tonight, since we know each other well and we worked on this report card together, to spice things up a little bit. And his version of spicing it up was to be funny. So tonight, yeah, exactly. Tonight, you will see me struggle and him excel, maybe, at being funny. We appreciate your laughter, even if it is a pity laugh, like you just practiced. We look forward to hearing in the reception portion of the evening ways that we can improve on this emerging skill set. Now a little bit of background about your speakers. I'm going to start with age before beauty. Dr. Peter Kareiva, or PK as he's known to many of us, has been the CEO and president for about 5 years. Prior to that, he served as the director of the Institute of the Environment and Sustainability at UCLA, and that's where we first met each other and worked together. Prior to that, he held some really amazing positions, including being the chief scientist at the Nature Conservancy, the director of the Division of Conservation of Biology at NOAA's Fishery Lab in Seattle, and a professor at several institutions, but not very good ones. Ones like Brown University, University of Washington, and Santa Clara. I don't know. I don't see Princeton anywhere on there. Meanwhile, Jennie Dean attended Princeton University. I have been here at the aquarium for just under 3 years, and in my role, I have the opportunity to enhance the institution's conservation profile and further augment the amazing learning that's occurring for all audiences. We have such great programming tonight amongst the different offerings of the education department. Prior to coming to the aquarium, I worked at UCLA, you know that already, and I also spent a long time in Washington, D.C., navigating that policy landscape, working either for the federal government or nonprofits doing advocacy on topics like marine protected areas and international agreements, things that might not persist into the future, unfortunately. So with that background, I want to invite my co-presenter PK to the stage to get us started. While he does that, I encourage you to silence your phones, but keep them handy because you will be using them during the presentation this evening. Peter?
We both went to Duke, so we have some shared intellectual history. And we're both looking forward to Duke winning the NCAA this year. Okay, so the report card, Marine Species Report Card, you notice the report card is in big font. That's Jennie's influence. Report cards were always a positive point in her life. They were traumatic in my life. I wanted to have marine species be in the big font, and that's what I really want to focus on here is marine species and why all this about species. So the reason I wanted to focus on species and the reason we collectively wanted to focus on species, let's see. There we go. Oops. It went too fast. Okay. So, you know, I mean, any of you who've been to the aquarium, you've seen children and families come here and interact with our exhibits and really connect, be excited. Everybody has their favorite animal, their favorite plant, their favorite species, and it inspires them. But in general, we're in a situation now in the world, these data are for the US that I put up here, but it's really not the US, there's a big disconnect from nature. And when I say nature, it's really a disconnect from species. Because students learn about the environment and biodiversity and climate change, but it's very different to learn about species. But species is more emotional and it's more intense, and it really does allow you to connect. But nowadays, kids in the US spend 9 hours outside school on their cell phones. That's not connected to nature. And they know more, children nowadays know more about corporate logos and Pokemon cards than they do about species. And there have been studies where they ask how many Pokemon characters or how many corporate logos can they identify, and then they compare that to things like squirrel, oak tree. We're not talking about arcane, esoteric species. And the children consistently can identify more Pokemon cards and more corporate logos than animals. So I think there's something, we're missing something there. That's about children and education and conservation. But it's also a kind of I guess I would say a policy or a wonkish idea about it. I think probably everybody in this audience has some sense, you may even know the figures, like how many parts per million CO2 there is. You've heard about plastics in the ocean. You've heard about biodiversity decline. But those are things, CO2 in the atmosphere, even plastics in the ocean, they're conceptual, but you don't see it that often. You don't see it in an immediate personal way. And newspapers and the media covers these, but how often did you hear about how are our sea otters doing? How are the gray whales doing? How's the giant Pacific octopus doing? How are sea urchins doing? Yet those, when we talk about nature and the environment, in the end, it is the sea otters, it is the urchins, it's the kelp that combine to make that environment. And I think we've got to a situation in conservation where we've lost sight of species. And I say that because I devoted, 40 years of my life to conservation, and I've been part of this losing sight of species. I started out because I love species, but then I got really attracted to easily quantified things that we can measure from satellites or from drones. But the problem is, everything can't be measured from satellites and drones. Sometimes we have to get out and see how the animals are doing. That's what the report card is about. Getting out and seeing how plants and animals are doing in California. Because it takes work to do that, we need to support it, and we can learn a lot from it. And I hope you do. And this is taking you back to your college days, and I hate to do this to everybody, but this is a technical explanation of one of the reasons you want to have a report card where you track how species are doing year after year after year. When we first released this report card, we had a lot of media here. And what did the journalists ask me? Will you be able to, can you tell me what the effect of these wildfires are on marine wildlife? You might think that's an easy question to answer. But if you look at this slide, supposing I went out and got about 2 sea stars before the fires in 2024, and then I came back a year later and got 1 or 1.1 sea stars a year after the fire. You might be tempted to say, oh, the fire killed off half of the sea stars. And that's what it did. You couldn't say that, though. You might be tempted, but you actually could not say that. You have to have a series of numbers where you count the sea stars, you count the otters, you count the whales, you measure the kelp year after year to see that. And just if you look at this slide up here, if your trend, and Jennie's soon going to come up here and talk about trend analyses, if your trend was trend A, on the left up there, you would say, there's no indication that the fire did anything. It's just a steady decline of 50% every year. It's not the fire, the species is just declining, right? But if it's the trend on the right, you would say, oh, there's some evidence the fire did a lot of damage. Now, that's not the only reason we monitor, but it's just, it's the only way we really know how plants and animals are doing is if we count them, measure them, and look for them year after year after year, and somebody has to collate the data. That's what the report card is about. It's trying to start to paint a picture of how the animals that you can see here in the aquarium, you can see here in the intertidal, and you can see when you dive here off the coast of California. Now I'll turn it over to Jennie now.
Which brings us to the report card. So the report card, as Peter introduced, is a tool to better educate you and the communities across California about our ocean neighbors. There are 30 species in the report card that are shown up right there. I recognize the font is too small to read all of their names, but hopefully many of them you already know just by their picture. This report card was started 2 years ago and reflects an amazing amount of work done by many, many people, which I'll go into. It was launched just a month ago, and tonight we're going to take a deep dive into a couple of the species, 8 more specifically, but we're going to do a light touch on the methods. So how did we derive the population trends, et cetera, knowing that you probably care more about the things as opposed to the methods. But feel free to ask tough questions in the Q&A period. So the aquarium is where it's housed, and we were the ones who started it. However, again, it was a team effort. We worked with a variety of different contributors across the state, from nonprofit institutions like Audubon, California, and Point Blue, faculty and researchers at various universities like Cal Poly Pomona and UCLA, and government entities like CDFW. This required a lot of internal collaboration as well. So we leveraged very heavily many teams across the aquarium, our husbandry and animal care team, our education team, our web development team, and it looks as beautiful as it does because of those web developers. So Andrew Reitzma and Jovel Madrid, hopefully you're watching online, but we really appreciate the beauty that you were able to give to this product. The contributors aren't here today, although some of them could be, and I did think that they deserve a round of applause in absentia. So I'd encourage us all to give those 26 external contributors and 41 peer reviewers, thank you, a round of applause. And we're also quite happy to have financial support for this project from the Dorrance Family Foundation. All of the data, with the exception of that for green sea turtles, is provided by others than the aquarium. These are long-term data sets that have been provided by government entities or community scientists or researchers. This data is available to you, but sometimes it's buried. So the report card serves as a platform to unbury it for you. One particular data group that I'd like to make mention of is marine. Marine is the multi-agency Rocky Intertidal Network. This stretches from Alaska down to Baja, California, and it does long-term monitoring of rocky intertidal zones. So the vast majority of our invertebrate species and our plant and algae species, the data came from this group, and we're really grateful for that. That should not be understated, though. Many, many other contributors, and we encourage you to check out the data sources that are on each of the species accounts. Without data, we can't know how species are doing. Peter gave a great example of that, but this is another point in the presentation to really stress that long-term monitoring matters. It can be expensive or not expensive. It could be driven by you, community scientists, going out there and observing like we do with our green sea turtles here at the Aquarium of the Pacific. So the nuts and bolts of the report card. When you hear report card, you probably thought we were going to be talking about grading, right? A through F. This report card is a little bit different. We started with that method, but quickly understood that that wasn't going to be as most effective way to communicate with our public. And instead, we have 5 population trend categories, which are designated with those arrows. It goes from strong increase, weak increase, stable with fluctuations, which is important because rarely are you having the exact same number of animals year to year. There's going to be a little bit of up and down. Weak decline and then strong decline. And I apologize, I just did those in reverse, but hopefully you know up means increase. So ultimately, those 30 species each get a single trend score, and then they have additional components that augment that trend score. There's obviously the data that are shown in plots, but there's also some threats. So 6 different threats were identified by our contributors group as being pressing to marine species in the present. We used a literature review to identify which of these threats were directly impacting each of our 30 species. They range from things like climate impacts to extraction, which would be something like fishing. In addition to that, we know that narratives are really effective to communicating information, and so there are a series of sections in each of the species accounts that cover things like reproductive biology, morphology, the range, so where it's found here in California, and cultural significance, so how has the interaction with humans occurred at present or in the past. And the real focus is on conservation. So we have a large section dedicated to conservation actions, both from the Aquarium of the Pacific and other contributors, including regulations. So we want you to be able to take away how things are being impacted, usually for the positive, by humans, in addition to some of the threats they might be generating. So there you have the nuts and bolts. It's now time to transition to the stories. And for that comes more of the comedy. So here we go. Peter and I have a relatively unusual character trait. I think it's relatively unusual. The way that we portray ourselves to you when we have a conversation is often the opposite of the way that we actually think. So one of us is often positive and enthusiastic outwardly, but they're actually a glass half empty person. Whereas the other of us can strike folks as a critical pessimist, but is actually a glass half full person. So for the rest of the presentation, as we tell you these stories, the personality leanings of the person will let you know as a forecast whether it's going to be a bad news story or a ray of hope. Now, because these are 2 very different approaches, it does require a stage adjustment. I invite the AV team to turn on spotlight number 2. We will be standing at different podiums for this presentation. So as we get started, I encourage you to pull your phones out. We're about to begin the interactive portion of the evening. And I will invite Peter up. He has prepared, I think it's a short rap about the species found in the report card.
Yes, right.
Oh, actually, no, sorry, I got that wrong. Not a short rap. We are going to have you use a QR code for the next portion of the evening. So, short podium, short lady. I invite you all to scan that QR code. I now invite AV to switch over to the Mentimeter, a live polling platform, and we will explain what's going to happen. So you will have the opportunity to answer a set of polling questions. To do this, you do need a smart device, or if you're at home on your computer, you can do it through your computer. You'll have the opportunity to submit a single answer for each of the questions, so think carefully before you submit that answer. And the results are posted in real time, so you're going to see how your peers are responding, but it's anonymous. So don't worry if you're getting the wrong answer. It doesn't say Bob Smith wrote the wrong answer. Our first question invites you to reflect on Peter's original piece of information. Do you know your species, or are you in the category of knowing more Pokemon characters? So those in the booth, could you advance to our first poll question? So again, you should be selecting which species you do not know. We should start seeing dots appear on the species that the audience is unfamiliar with. If no dots appear, then you guys all know all 8, and that's really fantastic. All right, I see some clustering in that lower left. I'm going to allow some people some more time to respond to the poll.
Bob, you can ask for Vale's help if you want to.
We're We're going to give it another maybe 15 seconds, and then I'll have, we'll talk about what we see up here. I think we might be suffering, Peter, from some visual impairment. With the house lights being up a little bit, some of our darker images are people are having trouble with. All right, we're at a pause, I think. All right, we have some, I would say 50% of our species up here people are having a little trouble with, though in small numbers. 17 out of audience size of 200 is not so bad. We're going to walk you through each of these 8 species in sequence and tell you some stories about them. AV, I think you can hit it to the next poll. This poll has 4 different questions that you're responding to, and it's trying to predict, of our 4 species, which population trend category we evaluated them to. So you can select strong increase all the way 5 different steps down to strong decrease. So as you open up this poll, it should be the same QR code. If you've already closed that app on your phone, you can pick it up. Perfect. We see people going in there. Now, the reason that we put these 4 species up together is because they are all kelp forest residents. And so there's some opportunity here to see correlations. As a reminder, a score of 3 would be stable with fluctuations, and I see that the audience is thinking most of these kelp forest residents are all stable with fluctuations, with the exception of sunflower sea stars, which is in that weak decline or weak decrease category. Now, what's really interesting about this is for those who are educators in the audience, and I did see some of my peers here, which is wonderful, you know that some of these species can have interactions with others, such that if there was an increase in one species, there could be a decline in another. We're not quite picking up on that on your predictions, but we will explore that more fully when we go through each species. AV, we can have you return to the PowerPoint presentation. We don't want the interactivity to end, though, so we had 2 poll questions, but we now are going to have vocal interactivity. So, as I said, one of us is a glass half empty person. Another one of us is a glass half full person. When that person steps forward and begins their story, we want you to predict if it's a happy story or a not so happy story. If you think it's a happy story, I want to hear a cheer. Yay! Could you guys practice? Yay! Okay, and if it's a sad story, I want to hear yeah, there we go, or a wah-wah. All right, so kicking us off with our first animal of the evening is southern sea otters.
Come on, let's hear a cheer. Jeez. Jennie will do anything to get me applause. The sea otter. So early on, when I showed a slide and I had a list of things like CO2 and stuff like that, I had biodiversity decline in there. Biodiversity lost. Most of you probably couldn't care much about that, or at least you care about it intellectually, but not at a personal level. Starting with the sea otter, people care about the sea otter. So many people come and they love the sea otter, they come here, and so how the sea otter does, and connecting people to how the sea otter is responding recently to our actions in the ocean, is a real way to get people to connect to conservation. Next. So the sea otters, I think most of you know this story, it's pretty commonly known, but basically the sea otters nearly went extinct in California. They down to 1932, they were down to 38, 1938, they were down to 38 animals, 38 sea otters in California. And now their range is shown on the map on the left, and you see it basically goes from Point Conception up to a little bit south of Half Moon Bay. That's where they're restricted now. And they're really important. Jennie alluded to those interacting species in the kelp forest. This is a food web shown on the right. The sea otters are at the top. Any of you who are in education or teach ecology or conservation, they're what's called a keystone species, a top predator, an ecosystem engineer. Basically, the presence or absence of sea otters determines what you see off our coast. So it's really, really important to those other species as well. Next slide. So how's it doing? I don't show the actual statistics on this graph, but these are the data. This is what the long-term data do. There was a gap in this data because of COVID, but these are the counts of the southern sea otter, and the population is stable. It's spreading, it's not getting bigger, but the population is basically stable. It's about 3,000, a little under 3,000. And the interesting thing here is that it's been stable for quite a while. Our goal at the aquarium is to hope that that range map, eventually the population will be all along the whole coast of California. It'll return to its glory. Now, the way we're only going to be able to find out if that's happening or whether we're doing is right is with this monitoring. The sea otter still, even though it's come back quite a ways, it still does suffer from a number of impacts. Pollution can directly get it. The climate influences it through its food supply, and it still can suffer from human harassment or even just getting tangled up. But basically, the story of the sea otter is, I think the sea otter is the opportunity for California to return to its glory days of otters romping along our coastline, all up and down. It won't happen during my lifetime, but it'll happen during some of your lifetime.
Yes, you guys were good on the poll on this one. This is a sad story. It's sadder than the poll indicated, though. So this is a sunflower sea star, and it's in our strong decline category. This is a really, really impressive species. It is a very big animal for a sea star. It has many arms. Many of you might have thought sea stars have 5 arms. These can have up to 24. And on those 24 arms, there can be 15,000 tube feet. Those are the little suckers that allow them to move. And they move really fast, about as fast as Peter was moving prior to his hip surgery. 1 meter per minute. It's a voracious predator, which eats many things and bigger things than you would have expected. So fish and birds and octopus it can scavenge on. But its more typical food are urchins. It historically has been found from Alaska down to Baja. However, they're virtually extinct in the state of California now. Only 5 observations were made of this species in 2024. Because of that, there has been a movement to get greater protections for this animal. What happened to it? A wasting disease. So starting in 2013, there was this mysterious condition that was basically melting stars, not just sunflower stars, but billions of other stars, different species. You can see a picture there of what wasting disease looks like. We still don't know very much about it, which means there isn't a cure, and so it's still a persistent threat. So in partnership with figuring out how to repopulate the species, we also need to figure out how to protect it against this really devastating disease. There is hope, however. We have been part of a partnership across the state, and there are other entities across the country that are involved in partnerships within the zoo and aquarium industry to do breeding under human care. What you'll see on the screen right now, if this is successful, is one of our baby stars. We had a successful breeding event with other institutions here in the state last year on Valentine's Day. You might have read about it in the New York Times. And as a result, we now have many of these juvenile stars behind the scenes. If you want to learn more about sunflower stars, you're in luck. Our June 1st Wednesday is going to focus on this. Oh, so interesting. Is it a happy story? No, my friends. It is a case where increasing actually does not mean happy. So yes, purple urchins are in the strong increase section. They are found in kelp forests and rocky intertidal areas. They graze algae, they eat kelp. However, because they are the prey of sunflower stars and other top predators, and those predators no longer exist in the numbers that they used to in that kelp ecosystem, their populations are unchecked. This is not so great. Why? They turn into overtaking these ecosystems. They destroy kelp forests because there's nothing to kill them. And then once they destroy these kelp forests, it results in something called an urchin barren. So you're not seeing very much other life other than purple urchins. These urchins are effectively zombies. So when you go scuba diving or snorkeling, they will come after your brains. Oh wait, no. Wrong zombies. They are zombies in that they are living on very little nutrition, and they can persist for a very long time. That's dangerous because when some food does come back to the ecosystem, they're quick to destroy it. It also is bad for the ecosystem because they're also not nutrient rich. So if other predators came back and you're trying to eat this nutrient deficient zombie urchin, you're not getting as much nutrition as you should be. So steep increases in purple urchins, which is particularly bad for our kelp ecosystems. I'm going to go back and just point out a footnote. You'll see that this data showing the increase refers to MPA versus reference. Both of them are clustered together. MPA stands for Marine Protected Areas. Tonight we're running out of time, so we can't talk about marine protected areas, but you know I care a lot about them. And so I encourage you to look for that narrative throughout the report card's website. And in particular, if you check out the spiny lobster species account, you'll learn about the success of marine protected areas. All right, some of you are paying attention. This is wonderful. We're just going to speed through kelp. I first wanted to start with a educator's pet peeve, which is how do you tell the difference between giant kelp and bull kelp? So you'll see the table there on the left, so memorize it in case you're curious. What you're going to see most likely when you're around the Long Beach area is exclusively giant kelp. Bull kelp and giant kelp are facing declines. Bull kelp more steeply, which is why it's in our strong decline category. Similar time to the sunflower star decline, there was a warm wet water event, and the warm water is not conducive to kelp growth, so kelp died off. That was a strong problem that you'll see in this time series. So as I click through it, you'll see the map over time. This is aerial imagery, so photographs taken above coastal areas of kelp canopy. Kelp canopy are the blue hexagons. Gray hexagons are where kelp could be, but isn't during that particular observation. And then white is when a pesky cloud shows up and blocks our data. I'm going to keep narrating as we go through this, but we're starting in 1997, and you're seeing every quarter how the kelp changes. The reason to show this is because kelp does change. It is natural for it to ebb and flow. It grows very quickly. It's in certain places, certain times, and it disappears. But what you'll see once we get a few seconds in is that ebb and flow trends towards less and less. So bull kelp is not coming back. It is particularly a problem where it's found, which again is Northern California if you looked at that table. But giant kelp is in a similar but less drastic situation. Giant kelp we placed in a weak decline category. So I'm going to let it run a little bit. It's going slowly, but hopefully you can sort of see the change. We're now at 2008, and we'll go up through 2025. This data is available to you. It's at kelpwatch.org. And so you can play with the data. You can zoom in to your local bay and understand what's going on there and see how the kelp is changing over time. There are restoration initiatives underway to help with this problem. The aquarium is a part of two. The first is the Pacific Coast Ocean Restoration Initiative. This is a multi-partner approach to different kelp interventions. Outplanting kelp, working with sunflower stars, working with white abalone, and doing workforce development to have a new cohort of people help support those conservation initiatives. We also do a kelp genetic banking program. We're storing thousands of small samples of kelp in our care. We're getting close to the present. Hopefully you've been watching as I've been narrating, where you're seeing that kelp declining. Back to the kelp genetic bank. So we're storing kelp samples here and practicing with our animal care teams how to produce baby kelp. Baby kelp exists in 2 of our exhibits currently. We encourage you to come back during regular visiting hours to check that out Eventually, we hope to work towards outplanting that kelp into Northern California ecosystems.
So this is a happy story, and you can see what I have to deal with every morning when I come in. Jennie and I are both morning people, and when I come in every morning, she tells me everything that's wrong that I need to fix. But the lesson from these happy stories I'm about to tell you is, if we try, if we really make an effort, we can turn things around for species. And you notice that even the sad stories, that disease in the starfish is a relatively recent phenomena. We haven't had that much time to deal with it. And even the bull kelp decline is relatively recent. And so these are the cases where we're just starting the effort. So let's start with giant sea bass. Giant sea bass took a dive. It used to be really common fish in the early 20th century. It was very common in seafood markets in California. Its harvest peaked in 1932, and since then it's been declining. And the graph on the left is not part of the report card. That's a commercial yield harvest of giant sea bass. So you could just see it basically collapsed. And so now regulations have been imposed. You cannot harvest or take giant sea bass in state waters. And there's a lot of effort into rearing, spawning giant sea bass and putting them out into the wild and studying it. Next. And so the result is that their population is actually increasing now. And this is an example, sort of a formal analysis that's in. This is for every species in there. We just show it for this one. You can look at the population change through time. You can statistically fit a curve to it, see how well it describes it. And what you see is the giant sea bass is increasing at over 3% a year. That is a success, and it's because we've made that commitment and we've put a lot of effort into it. The giant sea bass is also interesting because it's a real opportunity for community science. If any of you are divers, there's a program where you take a photo of a giant sea bass. I think if you show the next slide. Oh, go back. I think I have to go forward, sorry. You see all the spots on it. The spots on sea bass are diagnostic and can identify an individual. And from community science divers taking photos of individual sea bass, collecting that data, sharing it around, they are able to estimate the population. It's called mark recapture, and they estimate 3,000 sea bass now. That's only possible because of the divers taking the photos and submitting those photos to get this data. Now go forward. Okay, another sort of iconic success story is pelicans. Some of you are old enough like me to remember what DDT did to seabirds, but pelicans were really hammered by DDT because they sit at the top of, again, they're at the top of the food chain. All the pesticides, the chemicals get concentrated as you move up the food chain. And so their eggshells, this is what DDT did to all birds' eggshells, interferes with calcium deposit, and it makes the eggshells brittle. So when the pelicans would come back and sit on the nest, they'd end up with an omelet. They couldn't support their weight. And so there was a massive crash of the pelican population. And next slide. And then, thanks to this woman, Rachel Carson wrote the book Silent Spring. She drew attention to DDT and its impact, not just to pelicans. Pelicans was one of the species, but species on East Coast, West Coast, all across the country, and really testified in front of Congress and set the stage for the Endangered Species Act. She's very much part of the founder of the modern conservation movement. She did it while being just criticized by industry and the media. It's really, if you ever have a chance to learn anything about her biography, she's a heroic woman that just was really subject to a lot of abuse. But her book led to DDT being banned, and it led to the Endangered Species Act and pelicans come back. And this data here shows the pelican data. There's only 2 breeding sites, nesting sites in California. It's Anacapa and Santa Barbara Island. So about 10% of the pelicans in California are breed in those sites. That's what's being counted here. The other 90% of pelicans go to Mexico to breed. But the population is not declining, it's stable, and it's doing well. That's pretty amazing because we nearly lost these birds in California. We really nearly lost them. Okay, another positive story. I mean, I think most of you are aware of whaling industry decimating whales for whale oil, and then with the Marine Mammal Protection Act and the International Whaling Commission, whales coming back. The gray whale, the Eastern Pacific gray whale, was not a very significant species commercially compared to the other big whales, but it was significant in California. It was really easily harvested in the late 1850s, 1860s, when the ships discovered, go to the next slide. This is an image of the ships in the California lagoon. When the ships discovered that they could get the whales in their calving grounds, it was just an easy slaughter, and much too easy. And the gray whale population declined to maybe like 2,000 because of this. Next slide. But it's come back. The whale population has come back. These are accounts from NOAA. They don't do them every year. You can see they're spread out. This is also a stable population of gray whales at about between 20 and 30,000 gray whales now off our coast. And the interesting thing about gray whales is you see them in the media often. Whenever there's a whale stranding, it captures the attention of the media. There was a couple of periods where there was exaggerated whale strandings, so there's more whale strandings than ever before. But it didn't actually have an impact on their population. You see, the population came back. Again, that's why we track them. We have to know not just what we see, but what it's meaning for the whole population. The gray whale recovery is one of the most striking recoveries, if you think about, of a pretty majestic animal that you can count on going out and seeing now from a whale watching boat when they migrate from Alaska down here. So it's really pretty amazing that one species that was near extinct now is a tourist attraction that we can go out and see.
A tourist attraction which you can participate in at the Aquarium of the Pacific. We have a partnership with Harbor Breeze Cruises, if you're not already familiar, and go out multiple times a day. So you can see these guys if you come to the aquarium. Our final species that we're going to close the night out with is the Garibaldi. Any guesses on this one? It's kind of a mixed result. So the Garibaldi was evaluated as stable with fluctuations, which is a good thing. This is the California state marine fish. It's shown in its juvenile form on the top picture. They have these really striking iridescent blue spots. Those spots are a warning because Garibaldi are mean. They are very territorial. If you've ever had the opportunity to get in the water with them, they will chase you. Not like the zombies I just talked about, but literally chase you. But they don't chase the juveniles because they're not a threat. So those spots are a, hey, back off, you don't need to care about me, a warning. It's named after an Italian leader, Giuseppe Garibaldi, from the 1840s, who liked to wear red shirts. It looks mostly like an orange fish to me. Maybe not in this light, but it is an orange fish. So their naming thing there was a little bit confusing to me. The reason that I say this is sort of a mixed is stable good is because while its population is stable now, in part because it is illegal to fish for these animals directly, meaning you can't go out and try and catch it. If you incidentally catch it, you're not going to get in trouble. The reason that it's in maybe you should be a little bit worried is that they have the potential to be significantly impacted by climate change. So their growth, both rate and size and longevity are extended in colder waters. And as you may be familiar, the waters of California and other places in the world are warming. So as that warming occurs, we are a little bit concerned that the species could face declines into the future. So stay tuned. The reason we tell you these stories is so that you can come away thinking about the diversity of our coast. So there isn't one message to take away from the report card. It's not a yay or a wah wah. It is a mix of those things. And we only looked at 30 species. There are 1,700 species found off our coast. So we encourage you to be curious about other species and find out more. more information and continue to be active. We give you some ideas about how to be active. There is a tab on the report card site called Get Involved, and it focuses on 3 different things. Volunteering. You can volunteer here at the Aquarium of the Pacific, participate in our community science initiatives or habitat cleanups, or you can volunteer wherever you might be based. We have a YouTube audience. You could be based in Morro Bay, and we list some resources about how to get involved in organizations in your location. You could also donate. Maybe you don't want to go out and help with animal monitoring, but you could financially support the work that is going on to do that or to recover these species. We provide some links for which organizations you could do that for, the aquarium being one of them, but of course welcome you to explore other opportunities. And then finally, we encourage you to get civically engaged. You can advocate for long-term monitoring. You can say that this is important for our government to be spending time and effort on, or for local nonprofits to be doing that. I'm going to end the evening with one final poll. So I encourage AV to switch you over. You'll be able to get the QR code there, or you could pull it up on your phones right now. This final poll is just for fun. We're very curious to know, advance it one more time, which species you'd like us to focus on next. So I said we did 30, there's 1,700, minus 30 left to go. We're not gonna do all of them, but we wanna start with the ones that you guys care about most. So please enter a free response. It'll start to populate up there. You'll have the opportunity to get letters be bigger if multiple people suggest it. With that, I thank you so much for your attention. We're going to open up to Q&A. We're going to not put up the QR code again, but if you go to menti.com, MENTI.com, and then enter that 8-digit code, you can get to the same poll. The reason we won't put the QR code up is because then we'll lose the suggestions that people have already provided. But again, thank you so much for your time. I'm going to invite oh my goodness, he's so quick, silent and quick. Okay, so we're opening it up to Q&A. If you've been to First Wednesdays before, you know the routine. If you don't, let me explain what's going to happen. We have some lovely staff in aquarium garb holding microphones. They're going to go up and down the aisles. This is great. When you have a question, you raise your hand like you're in the 3rd grade and wait your turn. Let's begin.
That's a very impressive body of work. And I think we owe a debt of gratitude to Jennie and PK and the entire aquarium staff for putting that together. It's really necessary data.
Thank you. Do you have a question too, Bob?
No, but Val does.
Okay.
My question has to do with DDT. It has been researched and verified that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of barrels of DDT still in the ocean off of Rancho Palos Verdes. This aquarium has advocated in the past for creatures such as the vaquita in Mexico, but how about advocating for something right here that is damaging our marine species? We need to advocate to have the government get rid of all of those barrels. Is that possible?
So it's part of the conversation. We're not unaware of the situation. It is not a topic that the aquarium has previously engaged in, but we're discussing the portfolio of areas of policy that we can be more engaged in, and I appreciate that input. Other questions? And it's really hard. The glare catches my glasses, so if you have the mic, just start talking. Really, no questions. We've stumped you.
So again, I just want to reiterate, the whole point of this report card is species. And it seems like such a boring, mundane topic, but how much do we all know about how our species are doing? I mean, we know when we come here to the aquarium, we can see them, but there's just very little knowledge about how our species are doing, not just in California, across the country. I think it's something that we need to pay more attention to.
So I had a question on the kelp. When you showed the timeline and the movement over time, there was an area around Eureka that had a dot on it, but nothing above it and nothing below it continuously. Is there a reason for that?
Quite possibly. However, I'm not familiar at that level with the data. One of our aquarium friends, Kyle Kavanaugh, who's a professor at UCLA and been long involved in the aquarium's Marine Conservation Research Institute, was involved in this project and could explain that data. I think, Mark, you're the one who asked the question?
Yeah.
Yes, I'm happy to connect you with Kyle.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, neither Jenny or I are experts on any of these species, frankly. It's other experts.
We're
contribute to the data.
generalists.
We're generalists,
You should
yeah.
phrase it in a more positive way.
Okay.
On the lower level, we also have a question. Is there a mic available?
Front row?
Hi, thank you for all you do. How much of the funding is state dependent and how much is federal dependent? Just for a window into the future here.
So I think you're speaking to some of the withdrawal of funds, of federal funding, and what the implications are for this. That still remains to be seen. NOAA has laid off some people. One of our reasons of really wanting to publicize, even well before there was any withdrawal of federal funds, there's not much support for this type of work. So one of the reasons was to get support for this work, independent of what's gone on in DC recently. There's not enough funding. Now with that withdrawal, I think we're going to have to work extra hard. We're going to have to fill some gaps. This is not really expensive work. It's labor intensive. Often it's done with volunteers and students and things like that, but it does need support, and we will work ourselves to raise money to support these efforts. Other questions?
I see a question over there. It's amazing. Flashlight move, solid. We need you on a mic because we are live streaming, and so that for those participants to be able to hear. We'll come to you next. I'm sorry. Sounds like somebody else has a mic up there.
Yeah. Hi. I had a question regarding, so the report card is really amazing. It's an incredible thing that you guys have put together. I was curious if this is something that you guys have considered making yourselves, or if there's a resource similar to this that takes more of an ecosystem approach as opposed to like an individual species approach. And I guess if that is something that you guys have considered, I would be interested in why you chose the species approach versus like an ecosystem approach.
So I'll take a first stab at that, and then we'll have Jenny correct me. It's easier to quantify the species, even when you do an ecosystem approach. So there is a database that talks about endangered ecosystems, and it tracks them. Just like there's a database that talks about endangered species and tracks them. It's much more straightforward to understand whether a species is at 100 or 10 or 10,000 or a million, and what that means, than to characterize what is happening with an ecosystem. So the monitoring would be done at a species level, but notice when Jenny started talking about the kelp ecosystem, our goal as an aquarium is to restore the ecosystem. Our goal is for the whole ecosystem, all those interacting species, to be restored, but the only way we're going to know that that's happening is to count the species that make it up. So it's not to deny the ecosystem. In fact, our goal is not single species. Our goal is the marine community off the coast, but recognizing that if you want to know whether you're making progress or not, the best way to do it is to see how otters are doing, how kelp is doing, how urchins are doing, how white abalone are doing. Does that answer?
I think that answer is great. There also are other resources that exist at an ecosystem level. So the Ocean Health Index is one example, the Heal the Bay and Surfrider resources on the state of the beach.
The IUCN has a list called a red list of ecosystems. So if you go to the IUCN website, you can see their characterization of ecosystems for the whole world.
I want to make sure we're making a mic reach this gentleman over here. I think it's a gentleman over here.
Is this right here? Hello? Okay. Hi. Okay. So I was curious about the brown pelicans. Last year, there was like a lot, like there's a disease that like got them, and a lot were like dying off or just like super injured. As an avid lover of long walks on the beach and a civilian scientist, I was just kind of curious, like, what could be like methods on noting it or like reporting observations that we see, like.
So neither one of us are experts on what was causing the animals in distress, though the aquarium was part of the response team that was handling injured or malnourished animals. There are federal and state hotlines that I apologize, I don't have memorized, but there are federal and state hotlines to report animal strandings. So particularly high impactful animals like pinnipeds, pelicans, turtles. There's a hotline that you can use to report, and if you come find me after we're done in the podium land, I would be happy to look that up on the internet for you. It's also on the aquarium's website if you go to the sea turtle conservation page.
I think we should just take one more question if there's one.
Okay, I know we have at least 2 people
Are we-
with their lights. Go
Are we
ahead.
good?
Oh, good.
First of all, I want to thank both of you for your words this evening. You guys have been insanely wonderful. My question is, again, kind of almost to parrot what he said about like how good your report card has been. My question is about like the correlation between like climate change and how the numbers, you know, like we talk about kelp, we talk about sea otters, we talk about gray whales, you know, there's overfishing. Where does that kind of fall in line with the report card? Or is that something that kind of doesn't get talked about because it could be controversial?
No, we talk about climate change. It's real. It's happening. It's very important to talk about it, and small changes that we can be making to help mitigate for the impacts. Climate impacts is a climate change threat that we used in the report card, and it was the most frequently used, meaning 18 of the 30 species had climate impacts as one of the threats that they're currently facing.
And we had a requirement that there had to be a peer-reviewed article that documented a climate impact, not just worry. So if somebody wrote, "We're worried about climate impacts," that did not suffice. We had to find actual evidence of climate impacts before we said that.
Yes, and so climate impacts could look like warming ocean. It could be looking like warming air. We have some intertidal invertebrate species in the report card, and if the air is too hot, they also are going to be facing drying out, for instance. Climate change can look like sea surface or sea level rise, so changes to where habitats exist. Climate change could look like changes in ocean circulation, which can change nutrient availability, which then has a cascade throughout the food web. So, no, climate change is in there, and that exact word comes up frequently.
Yep.
So as Peter said, that's going to be our last question. That's because we're at time. That doesn't mean the conversation ends. For your participation this evening, you are rewarded not only with information and being a ambassador of the report card, but you get trading cards. Yes, we have gamified the report card.
This is our replacement to Pokemon.